Dealing with people, dealing with the ministry and the church, we can sometimes feel the same way I feel. Sometimes people and the circumstances that they face and the problems that they're in, it's difficult to handle. Sometimes they will disappoint us. Sometimes there's messes to clean up. And the only way to keep a clean barn is to keep it empty with no oxen. And the only way to keep your life free of people problems is to keep it free of people. But a life empty of people is a life empty of meaning, a life empty of profit and productivity in your own life. So I want to challenge each one of us here tonight to not give up, to realize that the messes are a part of doing a great work, that the product is worth the process. I want you to consider 3 areas where we tend to avoid the mess and focus on the clean crib instead. First of all, consider the Lord's church. Do you think there might be some messes to tend to in the church? You better believe it. Literally and figuratively, there's messes. But unfortunately, because messes are going to take place, there's some churches that have a motto: more people equals more problems. So let's keep it small. Let's keep it simple. Let's really not try hard to go after people. Besides, we're more about quality than quantity, right? Many churches tend to develop this clean church disorder. You see, a clean church tends to focus on the building more than those inside the building. It's perfectly all right to build a nice church. It's perfectly all right to have nice buildings and nice properties, and we should want that as a church. But when a building turns into a museum and a church considers it as a museum and not an outreach center, it's lost its purpose. You see, a church with a clean church disorder is when the idea starts to develop that we can own the house. You see just how many people want control. They want authority. They want their rights, their way. They want their uppermost place in the house. Do you know how long I've been in this church? Let me tell you something. We're not going to do such and such around here, and we begin to think that it's our house. We forget that it's His house. This is not my church to do with what I want, nor your church. This is God's church. And upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. Whose church? His church. And He's the one that's building it. Except the Lord build the house, they labor in vain that build it. But it takes a lot of work. It takes a lot to build a work for God. So the clean church chooses to just maintain, just exist with no goal, no plan, no vision, no new ministries, no outreach. Some may say, a van ministry sounds like a lot of work, a lot of headaches to me. Besides, you might have people coming in, they might mess up your nice carpet or the pews. We wouldn't want anyone messing that up. Or a prison ministry, what good would that do? Sounds like a messy situation to me. Or a ministry for those struggling with maybe a drug addiction. Sounds noble. Sounds like a good thought, but can you imagine the messes, the problems? Where there is no vision, the people perish, the Bible says. And so many churches are closing their doors because they begin developing this clean church mentality. They begin focusing too much on being clean rather than being filled. And I understand it's human nature to want the church to be a place of peace and tranquility and beauty. I'm there. I like things to be tidy. I like things to be neat. I like things to be orderly. And we want the facilities to be attractive. We want them to be spotless, and we want them to be presentable, no doubt. But we also want to sit in our seat. We want to have our church. Remember, a growing church is a church that will have to put up with some messes from time to time. So consider the Lord's church. Secondly, I want you to consider the little children. You know what my wife and I have discovered, that it's different now than when we were first married? When it was just the two of us, it was a lot easier to keep our house clean before we had 6 kids. No doubt kids are, and kids can be messy. We could say, sure, we'd have a lot cleaner house if we didn't have any kids. Where there's no children, the house may be tidy. But the increase of happiness, affection, and companionship comes through the presence of little children. There was a church in Kansas, in the Kansas area, that had a booming children's ministry and youth program. One summer, they'd remodeled the parlor to make it more beautiful for the women's ministry to use. Since the hall in front of it was the way to where the kids went to their youth rooms, the kids tended to kind of hang around and kind of just gather around that room where the ladies would meet. It was a pretty impressive sight to see. Well, one day, someone forgot to shut the parlor door, and some little kids went in, and they were bouncing around, and they accidentally broke a lamp. Well, the women's group, they got together, and they called an emergency meeting and decided that they would pay to have a new entrance made for the children's department. And from that time on, the children entered into the children's part through a separate entrance. They were banned from ever stepping foot in the wing of the church where the parlor stood. But things didn't stop there. They also padlocked the kitchen, the office suite, and a few other rooms of the church in order to protect them from those messy kids. It wasn't a coincidence that within less than 2 years, their booming children's ministry and youth program had dwindled down to almost nothing. The parlor was clean. It was tidy. It was beautiful. It was a wonderful sight to look at, but it was usually empty. As it turned out, the children's classrooms were also clean and tidy and usually empty. See, in the quest for clean and filled, clean won, and the church lost sight of its purpose. Now, by sharing this, I'm not implying, or I'm definitely not saying that any child should just run wild in church. There's definitely a Bible principle to do things decently and in order. That's not what I'm saying. But what I am saying is that the little children are important. And that most definitely applies to our conduct at church. But when it comes to the children at this church, what is your attitude towards them being here? Are you delighted to see them or dismissive of their presence? Are you more concerned with loving them or lecturing them? Or are you more concerned with seeing them as someone that is needed or just a nuisance? Do you pray for them or do you pick at them? Are you more likely to involve them or isolate them? Jesus said in Matthew 19:14, "Suffer the little children and forbid them not to come unto me, for of such is the kingdom of heaven." And I'm thankful for this church, and I'm thankful for the emphasis that this church places on the youth and the teens and the younger kids. And may that always be a focus of this church, that we don't try to just maintain a clean church, but that we would be inclusive to those that maybe are more inclined to messing things up at times and being a little bit more messy. Jesus placed an emphasis on little children, and I believe so should we. We're definitely going to honor and we're definitely going to uphold our older folks at this church, but let us not forget our responsibility to the younger generation. Some may say they're the church of tomorrow, but I say that they're the church of today because they're here. And if we don't steward them wisely, we might not have them of the church for tomorrow. So look at every young person in this church as a blessing. Look at them as someone that is a blessing to our church to have and to be a part of this ministry. Yes, at times they're going to be loud. Yes, at times they're going to fidget in their seat. They're going to be unpredictable. At times they're going to be messy. So where no children are, the church is clean. So what kind of investment are you making in the little children? I want you to notice, thirdly, consider the lost crowd. When bringing in new people, in particular those who don't know Christ, you're often dealing with broken lives, broken relationships, broken homes, those who've never really been to church. They don't really know how to act in church. Many times their life is all messed up because of sin. Sometimes as a church, I believe we can struggle if we're going to be more inclusive or exclusive. Should we be focusing on in-reach or outreach? Should we focus more on discipleship or evangelism? Should we focus on getting closer to each other or bringing in new people? Are we going to be more like a rescue station or a country club? Well, whenever you choose to get involved in outreach, it's going to cost. Sometimes it's going to involve some messes to deal with. Well, people are just not getting saved anymore like they used to, some people say. Well, may I remind you, that's not God's fault. God hasn't changed. His word hasn't changed. But maybe our attitude has changed. How do we fill the house? Well, we go. We compel the lost crowd to come in. We tell them that they're welcome, that we invite them and that they have a place here, that they're not going to be shunned, that they're going to be welcomed and invited and seen as somebody that is valuable.